I was talking to a person that was a senior HR manager who had come to our booth, and they asked us what do we do, and I told them, and they were taken back by how broad in scope background screening was. It wasn't just looking up a record in a courthouse and then giving that to an employer about somebody's criminal background, but it covers data privacy, data protection, obviously technology issues, applicant tracking, criminal records, credit records, motor vehicle records, immigration status. So it goes on and on. And so the broadness of of the industry and learning that you need to really stay on top of is quite high. So that's my thing is I tell people it's a great industry, it's got great people, and there's great opportunity. And if you're interested in a roller coaster ride, because it's going to continue to emerge and change, then it's a good place to be.
Welcome to Behind the Screens, Conversations with Background Screening Pros. I'm Les Rosen, your host, and I'm excited to have you here. On this podcast, we chat with the people who know the background screening world inside and out. Executives, industry experts, legal pros, and more. We dive into their personal stories and insights to give you a real look at what's happening behind the scenes. Whether you work in the screening industry or are just curious, Behind the Screens bring you the real, unfiltered conversations from the people who make it all happen. Stick around for stories you won't hear anywhere else. And ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Behind the Screens, Conversations with Background Pros. And today we have a special guest. We have a guest who is one of the sponsors, right now the sponsor of this podcast. A true gentleman in every sense of the word, a person who has contributed mightily for some time to the background screening industry through media and information and publications that we'll talk a bit more about. It is my pleasure to introduce the man, the myth, the legend, Mr. Barry Nixon. Barry, welcome.
Well, thank you, Les. It is great to be with you.
I assume everyone listening to this podcast is familiar with you, but just to round things out, let's start with what is it that you are doing in the background industry? Let's you take the floor on that one.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Yeah. Well, I like to joke with people that I'm the industry newsman, and that's an accurate portrayal. People think I'm joking sometimes, but we have a series of publications with our goal being to keep people in the industry and who want to know about the industry informed about the latest news and information relevant to background screening. Probably our showcase publication is the Background Buzz. It is a monthly online e-newsletter that is U.S. centric, so it's focused on what's going on in the U.S. and it covers a wide array of subjects from privacy issues to employment screening, tenant screening, data protection, immigration issues, whatever it is relevant in the last month that has occurred regarding background screening, we try to cover it. And our goal is to include information that's relevant to a background screening company running their business. Information they need to know, changes in laws, what's coming, or what have you. We don't just include something because it says background screening. So we choose what we include in there. And that's been a very successful venture.
And how long has that been going? Because I don't remember.
We started it in 2001.
Oh, okay.
So pretty much actually in parallel with what was then the National Association of Professional Background Screeners.
Right.
We pretty much started right at the same time. So we've been with the industry for quite a while.
I have to say, Barry, that in my humble opinion, that anyone who's involved in the background screening industry. It doesn't matter if you're an owner or a director or vice president, if you're doing verifications, if you're processing, no matter what it is, no matter where you are, if you're not reading the background buzz monthly, then you are just not going to realize your full potential and advance in the industry, because it is absolutely, in my opinion, a must read for anyone who wants to be a professional. But anyway, that's my thought. And you also have some really fantastic people who have columns and quizzes. Why don't you talk about that? I know Larry Henry's been there for a long time doing the legal
Right,
quiz.
yeah. Larry Henry has been very generous with his time, and he contributes to what we call the U.S. Legal Challenge. And it basically is a multiple choice question that Larry authors about some legal aspect of background screening. And again, the goal there obviously is to test people's knowledge and make sure they're up to speed on the latest and greatest. And since Larry is a very active and practicing attorney, he is drawing from real-time issues and then applying those questions to our audience. So it's something that's very popular, and people love it because they obviously can test their knowledge and learn from it. So yeah, I'm very appreciative of Larry for continuing to do that.
Well, I have to tell you, I haven't done it recently, but I used to take that knowledge quiz, and more often than not, Larry has stumped me. I have often got it wrong. And somewhere I have a plaque on the wall that says I'm a lawyer, and I still get it wrong. And who are some of the other people you currently have that are either contributing columns or quizzes?
Yeah, we have Bill Current with the Current Consulting Group. We have what's called the Drug Screening Challenge. And again, very similar, multiple choice question about drug screening to test people's knowledge about that area. The drug screening industry has continued to grow from the time that we started this. And that column has really kind of caught on because obviously the landscape continues to evolve, particularly as the drug screening laws have evolved and changed significantly since 2001. So that column has done very well. And then we have a couple of sponsored columns, one for social media that's sponsored by Ferretly, that talks about the emerging issue of social media screening. And again, as you well know, going back to 2001, that didn't even exist.
Right.
But obviously, as the internet and social media became the thing, along came social media, and Ferretly does an excellent job of highlighting specific issues related to social media screening. So I encourage people to take a look at that if they want to kind of stay up to speed on what's going on in social media screening. And then we have Inside Drug Screening, which is a column by Joe Riley, who really talks about some of the nuts and bolts of drug screening and highlights kind of obviously current subjects that are in the news, and he kind of breaks it down of what's really going on.
Oh, that's great. Anyone else want to bring that? And if anyone, if you miss anyone, don't worry. They can actually read the background buzz and catch everybody. It's like an
Yeah.
Academy Awards acceptance speech. Boy, if you leave out one person, it's like,
Oh,
wow,
I know.
what am I, chopped liver? You didn't mention
exactly.
me. Right
There is one other
But
sponsored column
sure.
by drug screening legend Nina French, Inflection Point, and it really is intended to talk about the future of drug screening and where it's going and kind of what we commonly refer to as what's next. So it's more of a philosophical and think tank regarding drug screening. Yeah, we try to highlight those subjects that are of importance to the overall background screening industry and use experts to tell their story.
Well, that's certainly a who's who of expertise in those various fields. And I think over the years, I recall there's various other people at times that have contributed and so forth. So
That's right.
what about the other publication that literally blows my mind because there's so much content is the international publication. And there's so many details about so many countries. I look at it, my eyes glaze over. I can't keep track. Tell us about that one.
Yeah, well, interesting enough, the global background screener was an outgrowth of the background buzz. We didn't start that in 2001. It came along a few years later because the size of the buzz kept getting larger and larger because we were including international content. So then we said, we need to do something different, and we decided to separate them into two separate publications. So it's internationally focused, obviously, with the name of it. And what we try to do is scour the world to see what's going on regarding background screening. Again, the goal, keep people informed about global matters that could impact their business. And again, as you well know, very much so, going back to 2001, the global background screening industry, if you will, was infinitesimally small. I think there may have been a handful of companies that did really focused on international screening. And boy, as we fast forward, that has changed. So there's players all across the world. So there's stories all across the world. And we try to keep up with it and make sure that people know what's happening elsewhere beyond just what's going on in their backyard.
Well, great stuff. As been reading it, obviously reading it for years and years, my question is, there is so much information. It is so knowledge dense, both the background buzz and the global screening publication. How in the world do you keep it all straight, gather it all, report it all, get it out every month? I mean, it's just the amount of data is just mind-boggling. And you did all this before AI. I mean, you did it. I guess you.
Oh
you said
yeah.
AI was artificial intelligence was Barry Nixon intelligence. How the heck do you do that?
Yeah, it's a labor of love. We obviously have a team of people that work on it, and people that specialize in sourcing information for the U.S., sourcing information internationally, other people that write and summarize articles. So it really is a team effect. I couldn't do it all by myself in any way at the size that it is right now. It's a daily task. I oftentimes tell people or ask people, when was the last time you read the LinkedIn? And if you have a LinkedIn profile, it will give you on your feed, it gives you people that are in your network what they are communicating. As you read an article or information someone has posted, it keeps bringing you another one. And I ask people, when was the last time you went all the way to the bottom of the column and read every one? And people say, hey, I rarely ever do that. I said, we do it a couple of times a day. So it really is staying on top of it and being present. What we've tried to do is also make connections and have people give us the scoop on issues that are coming along so we can include it. And many have done that. We'd love for more to do it because then we don't have to chase the news, but hey, we'll find it whether you give it to us or not. And
Well,
but yeah, it's a team of people, and the one thing it has done for me, and I feel blessed about this, is I really kind of have a picture of what's going on in this industry.
so you have your finger on the pulse because
Oh,
you're
absolutely, absolutely.
exactly.
Yeah,
All right,
yeah.
so before we kind of move off of that and ask you about your career and how you got there and some of the other things we'd like to ask our guests, is there anything else you want to share with the audience about other services you offer and provide?
Oh, absolutely. We published an annual background screening industry resource guide, which actually I think was the first publication of its kind, and it comes out in both print and digital format. And what it is, it really is a marketing tool for CRAs who want to reach the HR community. So we have historically launched it at the SHRM conference and then distributed it out to a large number of HR managers. I think last year we distributed out to 50,000 HR managers. And the goal of that is marketing, and is to put your company's name in front of decision makers in the background screening industry or in the HR community so that hopefully you can start to engage with them and get some business out of it. And so that's an annual publication. And then we also have a sister publication to that, which is the annual suppliers guide, which is really for suppliers to the industry to get their name in front of background screening companies. And that we were one of the first companies to, actually the only company to do that. I think PBSA certainly has a directory, but ours has been around for a very long time. And we send that out quarterly to our database of over 2,000 background screening companies. And we typically launch it at the PBSA mid-year conference, and then we also distribute it at the annual conference. So it gets very wide distribution and is a good marketing tool for suppliers who want to get their information to CRAs. And it becomes a reference tool. People say,
Right.
you know, if they need to make a change or find something, they go to that to find a supplier.
The publication you hand out to HR, I know, brings you to the SHRM, Society of Human Resource Management shows, usually the talent management show. I think they now call it the annual.
Right.
So I think during the period of time in which I spoke at SHRM, when I was still more active, I would speak at SHRM every year, 1, 2, or 3 shows for 15 years. And you and I then, that would be you and I would always see each other
Exactly.
at every SHRM show. All right. So this is crazy. Everything you do and the volume and the amount of information that you give the industry, to me, it feels like trying to take a sip of water from a fire hose. There's just so much good information. But how did you get there? What was your career path, Barry Nixon? What got you to being the news person for this industry and doing all the publications you do?
Well, it's interesting is I didn't have this great strategic business plan to go into background screening and provide news and marketing services. It was the outgrowth of my consulting practice, which I established back in 1994 on workplace violence consulting. I ran the National Institute for Prevention of Workplace Violence. Going back into the early 90s when we started, where workplace violence was an emerging issue. It wasn't a big thing, but it was an emerging issue. Even back
People
then,
don't realize about you that you were an early expert on workplace violence. And
oh,
background
absolutely.
checking firms talk about that all the time, but you were the guy that was in the ground floor and was a national expert on the subject.
Yeah, we were very fortunate and blessed to start that at kind of at the right time. I mean, my background is in human resource management. I came out of Fortune 500 companies where I ran HR organizations. And then I decided to kind of hang up my shingle for myself. And interesting enough, I tell people that I didn't call workplace violence, it called me, because I started doing HR consulting and that was going along well. And after probably, I don't know, 6, 8 months of doing that, I got a client call me and say, listen, they had an issue with workplace violence. Could I help them with that? And it was something I had dealt with when I was in corporate. So I helped them with that issue and it worked out fine. And then about a month later, I got a call from another company that said, well, this company had referred them to me because they had a workplace violence issue. Could I help them? So we helped them. And then about a couple of months later, the same thing happened again. Got a call from another company. So I'm a little slow, but I said, wait a minute. People are calling me about this, and I'm not even trying to get this business. So maybe I ought to specialize in this. So that's really how it came about. And so I turned my HR practice into a workplace violence prevention practice. It grew and grew, and we were one of the nationally recognized consultants in workplace violence. We served as the workplace violence prevention consultant for the state of California. So we did quite well, had a good reputation in the marketplace. In those days, I would tell people, you should do background checks so you know who you're hiring. And I literally could tell people off the top of my head, the half dozen or so background screening companies. And that list started to grow. But then along came 9/11, and all of a sudden, the background industry just took off. And that was kind of in parallel with when the internet was emerging and kind of coming into its own. And so we said, hey, well, let's put this list on the internet in our website. And so we did that, and then that list kept continuing to grow. And that really was led to then the background buzz. We said, let's make a newsletter. And so it just kind of rolled on that way. We looked for opportunities and took the step as we saw them, you know.
That's a fantastic founder story. One of the fun things about the podcast is I find out about things about people I've known for years. And I didn't realize until now that you had a Fortune 500 corporate HR background initially, that you came classic HR.
Yeah, that was my training ground. A student, I loved HR and did very well in it, fortunately. I was very blessed to work for some companies that invested in my training and development. And it has become an excellent background for me to have as I evolved through workplace violence and into background screening. And I'll share with you, while I was doing workplace violence consulting, my HR background was unique, which is interesting, because at that time when I started, the people that were doing workplace violence prevention work were ex-law enforcement,
right,
and there were a couple of psychologists. And so here I was with an HR background, but I loved it because I could beat the law enforcement guys every time, because I understood how organizations worked, and they just came in with a lock 'em up mentality. So it was fun in those days, but my HR background really became a strength and a unique characteristic, you know, as a consultant.
And you still have a workplace violence publication, if I recall?
Yes, you do. Oh, thank you for asking about that. We have a publication that's called Workplace Violence Today. And it is, interesting enough, obviously was an outgrowth of our practice, but it directly was an outcome. We used to host a radio show called Workplace Violence Today. And it was a weekly radio show, and we talked about issues related to workplace violence, news, research, studies, tips for corporations. And that was a fun project to do. That was before podcasts even existed. And then we had the idea, well, let's make this a newsletter as well, because then there's all kinds of information you can share in a newsletter that you can't really share. It was a half-hour program on a radio show. And there was a company in Canada, a training company in Canada, I don't remember the name right now, that had a publication called Workplace Violence Reporter. And I followed them and learned that they were interested in letting it go. So I purchased that newsletter from them, and we started out as the Workplace Violence Reporter. And then it evolved into the Workplace Violence Prevention Report, and eventually we adapted our original name of Workplace Violence Today. So yeah, I mean, it's been a journey with that. And while we no longer really are practicing on the workplace violence consulting, we've kept up the newsletter because it's unique in the marketplace because it's an open newsletter. And what I mean by that, we cover information about workplace violence regardless of whether it's another consulting firm, from the government, whoever is doing it. So it's not just a marketing tool where we talk about what we do. It really is a news and information source. And it's something we're actually very proud of and get a lot of kudos about from security, HR professionals, safety professionals, because it keeps them informed about really what's going on that side of the coin.
Well, this is great information. So basically, you rode along, you saw opportunities, you grew slowly, you added, and things mushroomed to
Exactly.
what you have today. That's great.
Yeah.
'Cause I remember meeting you. I mean, I'm sure I met you before, but I do remember meeting you. We were both presenting, and this could go back, early 2000s at a SHRM They used to call it, I'm not sure what it's called now, the Legal Legislative Conference, and you and I were both presenting, and we had breakfast or lunch together, and we got to know each other more. And then we went to India together, if you
That's
recall.
right. That's right. That's right. And you may not remember this, Les, but when you introduced your safe hiring program, I actually took it. And then you obviously wrote your book. You actually asked me to contribute content on workplace violence to your book. So we met actually before the background screening industry days, and we're working together then.
That's right. And then we were both at the Steve Brownstein, because Steve Brownstein was the first person to sponsor an international background screening conference. There's been many
That's right.
since, but he had the very first one. That was in India, Bangalore.
Bangalore,
And
yeah.
yeah. And I was the keynote speaker. Not that I knew anything about international background checks. I ended up writing in my safe hiring manual the first, a chapter on safe hiring at international. I think it was the first thing written on it, and Kirsten Baggis fortunately blessed it, so I was pretty confident that I didn't say anything too outrageous. And then you and I spent an afternoon running around Bangalore.
Yeah, that was fun. It was a great experience. Absolutely.
Oh, those are good days, yeah. So let's talk about, you had this illustrious career and very interesting things that you've done. Can you share with us a lesson that you learned early in your career that has stuck with you today that might be worth sharing?
Well, I've had many lessons, trust me. But one of the things I learned, and this was in my corporate days, I was very fortunate. I worked in the high tech industry, in the computer industry. So it was very fast moving, very energetic, and very focused on knowledge acquisition. And so one of the things I learned early on is that you need to keep learning as the internet and technology is just continued to grow at an astronomical pace. You just need to learn every day because what you learned a couple of years ago may not even be true anymore. So that's one of my key lessons, and it has been a driving force for me, is to constantly learn. I am constantly reading and trying to stay current. One of the things that I am not happy with myself about is I have lost my pattern of really reading books because I'm reading business stuff and business books and business magazines and information constantly. So I get tidbits of other things, but I'm not reading novels and books like I used to. And I'm an avid science fiction fan, and I miss really reading science fiction.
Okay, so that begs the question. Really quick, off the top of your head, your favorite science fiction author?
I can tell you my favorite science fiction book was Dune,
Perfect.
which was a fantastic book. And then obviously they made it into a movie, which was actually very, very well done. That one stands out in my book collection. But I mean, I got a whole bunch of them that I love. Yep.
So you're a Frank Herbert fan in that genre. That's
Oh,
great, great.
absolutely.
Oh,
Yeah.
great stuff. So one of the things that we like to talk about, I might have asked this question. I think we've covered it, but let's summarize it. What do you enjoy most about the background screening industry? What brought you to it? What keeps you in it? What gets you going every day and going to all these conferences and the daily grind of helping other people learn? Because by learning, you not only learn, but you also teach. So what interests you about background screening in particular?
Well, you know what's interesting? I was thinking about that question, and the one thing that stands out for me about the background screening industry, and I've had the pleasure of working obviously in the HR community, I've worked in the workplace violence, security community. The people in the background screening industry are the most interesting and collegial, if that's the right word, people that I have found in any particular community. And so it's the people that have stood out. I have met people that I have obviously learned a lot from, yourself in particular, but people that have become colleagues and then become friends. And that's really just unusual. And that's the people in the industry has really stood out as something I've loved and enjoyed and gained tremendously from. And again, the issue of continuous learning, it has afforded me a constant learning path because there are always new twists and turns and laws and issues that come up. So it keeps me on my toes from a learning perspective as well.
Well, we're going to skip around a little bit because you talked about continuous learning and the people. That brings to mind your participation from the very beginning with PBSA, starting off as NAPBS. How has that affected your professional endeavors in terms of learning and people and so forth?
Well, it's actually been foundational to all of those. PBSA came along, obviously, in its former, with its former name, at a
Yeah,
time when I was forming.
NAPBS, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
NAPBS, when I was forming my company on the background screening side. And so it was a natural for me to associate with it. And as PBSA grew, or NAPBS grew, I tried to immerse myself in that association because I could see the value that it brought from a networking and connections viewpoint. And that was one of the smarter things that I've ever did because as PBSA grew, my network grew, and somewhere along the line, as that international community started to emerge, PBSA asked me if I was willing to work with Bob Capwell, who's now become a great friend, to really help them expand into the international arena. So Bob and I kind of started a whole committee that focused on international and took PBSA into the international world. And it was one of the best projects that I've ever worked on. And as a result of that, I have colleagues and friends all over the world that I touched through PBSA. So it's been really core to my success and tremendous value to me. And I'll give PBSA a commercial is if you're in the industry or want to get in the industry, you need to be in PBSA because it will keep you informed about what's going on in the industry and connect you to people that can help you. So yeah, I'm a major PBSA fan.
Oh, fantastic. And I recall when you and Bob Capwell, you guys were really the impetus for this sort of the international focus. You kicked that off, got people started thinking about it, got the connections, got the contacts, and from that small acorn, a big tree is grown, to use a trite analogy. But the international part has really taken off, and to a large part, thanks to the foresight that you and Bob had, or the idea or the vision that it should be international, not just domestic. So that was a really huge contribution you guys made on that one. Before we get to life beyond screening, two quick questions. One area we haven't really covered yet, but knowing you, I know this is an area you're involved in. You're also very passionate about the second chance movement and fair hiring and so
Absolutely.
forth. What's been your involvement with that?
It's something that I learned about, obviously, as I've delved into the whole background screening. And I had a perspective at some point that while background screening is absolutely necessary and a wise business tool for industry to use, and I've obviously always been an advocate of it, we were running the risk of creating a whole second class of citizenship of people that couldn't pass a background check, so they couldn't get a job. And in many cases, those were people with criminal records. So that didn't sit well with me. And I started thinking, and then along came obviously the second chance movement and ban the box and all those things, which really took that notion to a national movement to try to remove barriers for people that had been previously incarcerated or had some encounter with the criminal justice system. So that was just one of those things that I thought was the right thing to do. I still think it's the right thing to do. And I understand there's a delicate balance, which I've had to walk, being an advocate of background screening, but simultaneously saying, hey, we need to make sure we don't leave these people behind because they have skills and tools and families and can be contributors, in this case, mostly the U.S., but it's a worldwide issue as well. But the big thing that I have been trying to be an advocate about is this is not just a nice thing to do, where it's okay, you're being a good guy, help somebody that has been in prison. The reality is the recidivism rate of people going back to prison is astronomical, and primarily because they can't get a job. So if they can't get a job to support themselves, what else are they going to do but commit a crime? So it's like it affects all of us, and if we ignore it, then it just is going to continue to fester. I think it's a great cause. I have certainly encouraged PBSA and companies in the background screening industry to pay attention to helping that community through their client base, because background screening companies don't hire people, but they make recommendations and can educate the end user about how to prudently use background screening and not just automatically eliminate people because they made a mistake, which they, by the way, have paid for their commitment to society for having made that mistake. So it's something I'm passionate about.
I've often said that as a background industry, we're not the employment police. We help employers make the good choices, and that there's no contradiction between being a background screening firm and being a firm that supports second chance where it's appropriate. I mean, that's absolutely part and parcel of the same thing, because as a background screening firm, although we don't think of it this way, consumers are also our clients. Under the FCRA, we may get paid by employers, but we serve the consumers. So anyway, that's great. And I know you're putting together second chance and consumer resources as well, so people can navigate that part of the employment process, as I recall.
Right, and that actually triggered my memory. We have a service that's a community service, so there's no fees involved. It's called the Employment Screening Advice Center. And when you look at the background screening industry, as you just alluded to, it's a three-legged stool. We serve the end user community who ultimately make hiring decisions. So that's one peg. You have the background screening companies who do the background screening due diligence stuff. And then you have consumers. So those are the three pegs that we've identified. And in our Employment Screening Advice Center, we provide advice to those three separate groups that's relevant specifically to them. So we have a advice center for job seekers. We publish actually a monthly newsletter for them that's called the Screening Pulse, and it really tackles one issue at a time that's relevant to a job seeker to help them learn about, understand background screening so it doesn't become an impediment, but something they understand how it works, the mechanics, and they can actually use it to their advantage. So that's one of the tools we put out there. And then we try to work with various second chance groups to, again, help educate their people about background screening so it doesn't become a problem for them that keeps them from getting a job.
So Barry, this is great. The more I mentioned, I was like, oh yeah, we do this too. It's just like what you do is just like, oh, and you do that, and you do that. So there's no end to what you do. So before we leave background screening, final question about the background screening area. As you look back in your career, and your career's not over, you're still working, but what comes to mind that you're most proud of or brings a smile to your face where you say, I did that. That was a good one.
Well, we actually already talked about it. I think helping PBSA to become an international association is something I am very proud of, felt really good about. As I mentioned, it was a great learning experience from a knowledge perspective and from a people connection perspective. And so I would say that stands out for me very well. It's something that you can't duplicate, having had that experience, and really making it happen. Yeah.
That's fantastic. I know just getting the domestic screening together when I was the chair of the steering committee and I called the first meeting to order, those were all domestic firms. And that was quite the thing. And then, as we talked about, you and Capwell had the vision to take it one step further. So fantastic. All right. So leaving background screening, let's talk about life beyond screening. When you're not reading everything you're reading and learning and teaching, what do you do for fun or hobbies when you're not immersed in the world of wild, wonderful, wacky world of background checks?
It's a good question. Probably a couple of things is I used to love to travel. And so I've traveled to many, many different countries, and this was in terms of personally traveling because I'm an explorer. I like to go to places and explore. I don't consider myself a tourist in the sense of I want to go see all the monuments and the graveyards and the tourist attractions. I don't do that. I try to go to places and meet locals, and then I hang out with them, and I find out things that you never see on the tourist trail. And that's just I love to do that. At this age, I can't do it like I used to do it, but that really stands out for me as something I had loved to do in my lifetime. The other thing that people may not know is, and I'm not a collector, but I love sport cars and convertibles. I've owned some classic sport cars and just had some fun driving them. To those of those that are sport cars advocates, they would probably know like the Jensen Healy, Triumph, obviously the Mazda Miata. I had a Toyota Supra. So I've had many different sports cars, and I just love them.
I like convertibles, but usually I like convertible notes, but you like the actual cars that are a little different, but
Yeah, hey.
well, that is a fun fact. I mean, that's something I did not know about you. I have not had the pleasure of watching you go down the highway in a convertible. It wouldn't affect my hair. I don't have any, but right. Any other fun facts? Anything else that secrets you're keeping that people may not be aware of that would be fun to talk about?
Well, I don't know about secrets. Having traveled extensively around the world, I have honed in on a few countries that are my favorites, and probably too much of a favorite. I'll talk about two. One is Brazil and Rio de Janeiro, which I've been to many, many times. And for young people listening, if you haven't been to Carnival, it's the experience of a lifetime.
So what's your other favorite country? We got
My other
Brazil.
favorite country is Thailand.
Oh, wow. Okay. As we go down the final stretch here, what is your advice for newcomers? In other words, what advice would you give to someone entering the profession or been in the profession for a little while and wondering whether to keep at it or change? What say you, Barry Nixon?
Well, I'm in love with the background screening industry, so I encourage people to get into it. And interesting enough, there are new players coming into this industry on a weekly basis. And even with all the laws and complications and emerging technology, people are finding ways to break into this industry. And I guess my advice is to continuously learn about it and make sure you understand not only the legal implications of getting into this industry, but also the business implications. And something that is very important, obviously, is to understand the full scope of what's going on. It's an industry that has many, many different components. And I talked to, this happened, I think, last year, maybe at SHRM, I don't know. I was talking to a person that was a senior HR manager who had come to our booth, and they asked us what do we do, and I told them, and they were taken back by how broad in scope background screening was. It wasn't just looking up a record in a courthouse and then giving that to an employer about somebody's criminal background, but it covers data privacy, data protection, obviously the technology issues, applicant tracking, criminal records, credit records, motor vehicle records, immigration status. So it goes on and on. And so the broadness of of the industry and learning that you need to really stay on top of is quite high. So that's my thing is I tell people it's a great industry, it's got great people, and there's great opportunity. And if you're interested in a roller coaster ride, because it's going to continue to emerge and change, then it's a good place to be.
And I didn't even ask you, I don't think we have time, about the biggest changes you've seen and what your predictions are, because that's a whole different podcast. We're going to skip that one.
Okay.
Because there's just so much to talk about. But it has been a fascinating conversation, Barry. I learned things about you I didn't know. I thought, you think you know someone, and boom, all sorts of great stories and great information. So before we close out this episode, let me turn the floor over to you and give you the final word. Anything else that you want to add or say? Go for it.
All right, thank you. First, I want to thank you for having me as a guest and for having this actually brilliant idea to do Behind the Screen, because it was your birth child. And I think it's a fantastic idea, and hopefully it will continue to be successful. But no, I think that background screening, as we've talked about, is a good place to be. I think there's a future in the industry. It's going to look way different 10 years from now than it looks now. And you and I may not, certainly probably will not be talking about it or thinking about it then, but the industry is going to go on beyond us. So I'm thankful for you. I'm thankful for the industry, and I'm thankful to all the people that have contributed to my success with preemploymentdirectory.com. I say thank you.
And Barry, on behalf of myself, and obviously, I thank you for being the sponsor of the podcast. And on behalf of everyone that's read all of your luminous materials over the years, let me thank you as well. And ladies and gentlemen, this has been a fascinating interview with our good friend and colleague, and the what do you call yourself? The newsman for the screening industry?
That's it. I'm the newsman.
The gentleman who knows what's happening. But I think you're right. I mean, 10 years from now, who knows what the screening industry will evolve, and new people will take it in new directions. That's part of the fun of it. And with that, let me thank once again our guest and our podcast sponsor, Mr. Barry Nixon. Thank you, Barry.
Thanks, Les.
All right, that was yet another wonderful conversation with a background screening pro. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to hit subscribe so you never miss an update. And hey, if you got a moment, we'd love for you to leave us a review. It really helps get the word out. For more info, or to catch up on past episodes, or to make suggestions, or to suggest possible future guests, head over to our website. Once again, this is your host, Les Rosen, and it's been a pleasure to bring you another episode. See you on the next episode. Thanks.